Should we start?
Wasima, you are the host now. There we go. All right.
All right.
Good luck.
Are you recording it?
It's recorded. It'll be on our Zoom account and everything. So you can introduce yourself, Wasima, now and say like your purpose. All right.
I'm Wasima Hussein, and I want to make a psychological game that would help people with addiction.
Okay.
And I would need your expertise on that. And my first question is, tell me about your job as a therapist.
Yeah. So I right now I work from home. So I'm at home right now, but I have my own private practice and I see people on Zoom at this point. Before the pandemic, I was seeing people in person. And I do 60-minute sessions, therapy sessions with people with anxiety, depression, alcohol use disorder, cocaine use disorder, any sort of substance problem. I'll see them as well. I at this point I see more clients with anxiety, depression, and trauma. So PTSD and complex PTSD, and about a quarter of my caseload of clients are addiction clients, so people in addiction recovery. But it's a little challenging because people with addictions mostly need to go to like an inpatient treatment program or an intensive outpatient treatment program where they're in groups getting sober for like 9 hours a week or even like 20 hours a week, like 3 or 4 hours a day, because the cravings are so strong that they need a high level of support to stay sober. So I don't do that anymore, but I used to run the groups, the intensive outpatient groups, to help people get sober and stay sober.
Can you tell me about your experience with the group?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I got my master's in social work at Loyola University Chicago. And my second level internship, so my second year in that master's program, they put me on a detox unit for people who had overdosed on, alcohol, heroin, any other substance, and benzos like Xanax or Valium, that kind of stuff. And those people would come in on, the worst day of their lives where they had almost died from a substance overdose. And we would counsel them. So there would be doctors and nurses helping them withdraw safely because benzo withdrawal and alcohol withdrawal actually can be fatal. It can kill you. So those first few days for people, they would need to be, supervised by medical doctors and nurses. And then I was there to do the talk therapy with them. And so we would do individual sessions, we would do group sessions, and then we would have their family members come and do family sessions as well. And they would stay in detox for anywhere between like 3 days and like 3 or 4 weeks, depending on their mental health and their physical health and their insurance, because insurance, it's like $1,000 a day or more out of pocket. So insurance doesn't want to pay for that. So they'll fight you for it. But these people could die if they, are let out too soon because of the withdrawal symptoms. So we would fight with insurance and get as many days as possible. And then after a year working there, so that was my internship. I was the only intern. So ended up running all of the therapy groups. And then after a year there, I started working in intensive outpatient at this nonprofit in Chicago called Rosecrance. And so what happens after people do detox is they go to either another inpatient unit for like 30 days of treatment, of talk therapy, and other types of therapy to get through it. Or if they don't need inpatient, then they go to intensive outpatient, which again is like anywhere between 9 and 20 hours a week of group therapy and individual therapy. And we did like art therapy and movement and all of that to help them stay sober. So, and the place that I worked at that point also had a sober living facility in the upstairs. So the downstairs was the outpatient clinic and the upstairs had 30 beds. So people could live there and then come downstairs for treatment. And they would get drug tested if they lived there, and they would have their own like house counselor to help them with stuff, help them get a job or go to school. And then, they could come and talk to us even in the middle of the night. I was the day shift, but they could come talk to counselors at any time if they're having cravings or if they were, really anxious or anything like that. So, yeah.
How would you track their progress?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, we I think there weren't like hard and fast tools to track progress, but we would do when they arrived, we would do an assessment and give them diagnoses of like generalized anxiety disorder, PTSD, and then whatever like alcohol use disorder, if it was alcohol, if that was their drug of choice. And with any substance use disorder, it's either mild, moderate, or severe. It's like a spectrum depending on how many symptoms they have. And so part of the progress would be decreasing those symptoms over time. So helping them have fewer cravings, helping them feel more stable mentally and emotionally. So less anxiety, less depression, getting them on the right medication. So they would see a psychiatrist if they needed medication. Sleep is a huge thing. Like usually when people arrive, maybe they've been taking like Adderall or cocaine and they haven't been sleeping for like 5 years basically while they're, high all the time, or going through periods of no sleep for months and then crashing, or weeks and then crashing. So we would track progress with sleep and mood disorder symptoms, but we didn't use any specific like measurement tools at the facility that I worked at. But we did get good at being able to tell when they were ready to discharge and ready to just come in once a week for like a 2-hour group and live out in the community, not live at sober living upstairs anymore. So yeah, but we didn't track it with any specific tools.
So there weren't any measurable way to track. Am I right?
No, yeah, there's not really with substance use stuff. I mean, the recidivism is really high. Like people will go out and relapse like very frequently and they'll come back to treatment. So, I mean, you probably could create a tool. I'm sure there are tools out there to track like their anxiety symptoms, their sleep, their depression, but honestly, that isn't going to predict almost anything. Like this disease, the disease of addiction is so difficult to beat and so powerful, that I mean your brain tricks you into relapsing. So yeah, I don't know how much you know about all of the addiction stuff, so I'm happy to go into any of it, but it's an interesting brain disorder for sure.
Why do you think it's difficult to beat? Can you like explain more on that?
Why it's difficult to beat?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the American Medical Association classified addiction as a disease, I believe, I'm not sure what year, like 70s or 80s, and 1970s or 1980s. And the reason they did that is because for something to be considered a disease, it has to have an organ that it affects. And the organ that addiction affects, unfortunately, is the brain. And so what happens is chemically, when you get addicted to drugs, is that chemical actually hijacks your reward pathway in your brain. And there is a great movie that explains it called Pleasure Unwoven, and you could even look up just a clip of it to explain the brain science behind it. It's Pleasure. Yeah.
Name of the movie?
Yeah, I'll type it in the chat. It's Pleasure Unwoven. It's really like a hokey kind of weird movie, but it explains it really well. So anyways, what happens is a chemical, like if you're using cocaine, for example, it hijacks your reward pathway, and your reward pathway is dopamine in your brain. And dopamine is used for happiness, but also for motivation. And unfortunately, what's tied to dopamine is your memory chemicals, the neurotransmitters that affect your memory. So what happens is, and this was actually created for an evolutionary purpose, when we were hunters and gatherers, what would happen is you'd go out into the forest and you'd find a tree with really good berries, for example, that are high in calories, so they can help keep your body moving. So what happens is you get a dopamine hit when you eat those berries, and then the neurotransmitter for memory attaches and says, remember this. So the problem is your cocaine, for example, will hit your dopamine way out of the water, and your brain's like, remember this. This is awesome. This feels so good. And unfortunately, over time, that remember this chemical is going to cause so many cravings. Like when you're feeling shitty, it's going to be like, hey, remember how good that was when you felt amazing with cocaine? So your reward pathway is completely hijacked. And even months later, even if you're sober for months and months, your brain every day is going to be saying to you, I need it, I need it, I need it. It feels like you need that for survival because it affects the midbrain, which is like the old survival brain. So yeah, it's just really tricky because those cravings, you have to starve your brain of the cravings over time. And they're very powerful, especially when you're not sleeping and, you know, you've gained 40 pounds from your addiction situation. You feel gross, you feel like crap, or those are examples. There's so many symptoms that happen when you've been numbing for years and years and you wake up and realize you need to get sober. And it's very hard to stay sober because the cravings are very strong. So yeah.
Is there anything available right now that would like replace the source of dopamine? Like if they're like craving, let's say cocaine, like can you like give them something that they would crave more and that's healthy?
So unfortunately, we all have a dopamine set point. And when you feel pleasure is when something like if your dopamine set point is 50 and a cookie hits 60, like you eat a cookie and you're like, oh, this is so good. And it hits 60, you feel some pleasure. Cocaine hits 1,000. Like, so there's nothing that will replace it. Like, and same with marijuana, it hits like 1,500. Like all of these drugs hit dopamine way out of the water. And then over time, your dopamine set point climbs. So it gets to like 800 because you've been using cocaine every single day for 10 years. And then a cookie doesn't touch that set point of 800. So it does not even feel good. So the other piece that we see is people are very depressed within the first year of quitting substances because they're so used to hitting 1,000 on that meter every single day. And nothing else like yoga and running and nothing else is going to touch that. What we recommend when you're going through withdrawal is to do as many of these things. Like if you have to eat candy. If you need to like work out every day to get that serotonin and dopamine flowing, then do that. Like anything you can do, just add as many of those things to your list to feel good as you can. And then the other thing is like antidepressants are good for like the first, 90 days or the first year. And there's actually anti-craving medications now as well that really only work for benzos and alcohol and heroin. Trying to think. Yeah, they don't really work for cocaine or weed. But yeah, they work. So, I mean, there's stuff you can try. And I always recommend like go to a doctor and get some supplements and possibly some medication because it's an uphill battle for the first 90 days, if not the first like 6 months. So, yeah.
Do they work for nicotine?
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. It's funny because in rehab, like in inpatient, we would tell people like if you are quitting a bunch of stuff or you're quitting like your substances that you've been using or heroin or something, fucking smoke cigarettes. We, excuse my language, we don't care. Like just have your cigarettes because heroin is going to kill you so much faster than those cigarettes are going to kill you. So it's like at some point, we would have to kind of use like a harm reduction approach, they call it, with like cigarettes in particular, of just saying like, okay, I mean, keep doing that. If you can stay sober from heroin, great, but just, use whatever vices like candy or cigarettes that you can. But yeah, I'm not sure about anti-craving medications for nicotine.
So earlier, I interviewed someone who actually like dealt with substance abuse, and
Yeah.
they said that the dopamine receptors of the brain are destroyed, like when you use drugs. So is that true? Like, can you tell me more about it? Yeah.
So as far as I know, and I've done quite a bit of reading on this, but I haven't done reading on the receptors specifically. I've just read a lot about how dopamine works in the brain. But as far as I know, they're not destroyed. I don't think that's true. Yeah. Yeah. I
Okay.
think that it's just your capacity to like your set point gets so much higher that it doesn't feel, you're not going to feel happy really often for the first like 6+ months. Yeah.
Oh, so you basically get higher standards for happiness.
Right, right. And it will come back. It does come back. It comes back to a normal set point. Probably it depends on how long you've been using, but if you've been using for a very long time, maybe 6+ months, even a year. If you've only been using for a couple of years, maybe even in 90 days or like 4 months, it would come back to like a normal set point, or at least start coming down significantly. Yeah.
So, how long would it take to come back? Does that depend on like how long you've been using drugs?
Yeah, it depends on like your brain chemistry, how long you've been using, and in what quantities. Like, so I myself am in recovery from alcohol use disorder. but my version of it, what I had was so mild that like it took me only maybe 3 or 4 months to start feeling better. And I would only drink on the weekends. Like I wasn't one of those daily drinkers. And so for someone who's a daily drinker, it's going to take a lot longer because you've been hitting that out of the water 1,000 every day. For me, I was hitting that maybe Friday, Saturday, some Sundays maybe. So yeah, it totally depends on how much you've been using, how long, and your brain chemistry.
So you earlier you were talking about an assessment that would like determine it like how severe it is. So can
Yeah.
you talk about the assessment?
Yeah. So, an assessment, we would do a mental health one and a substance use one at the same time. And the substance use component goes through the symptoms for alcohol use disorder or whatever, cocaine use disorder, whatever substance they had. Um, and you can find the symptoms, so the mild, moderate, and severe list of symptoms in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders. And so our assessment was based on that. And we would get a history of how long they had been using, how much, like literally from the first time that they've ever touched alcohol or any substance. And we had to go through every single substance with every person. So we would ask, and it's the thing with people who are addicted to substances is that we tend to lie a lot. Like people have so much shame around this experience that at the beginning of the assessment, I would ask about weed, I would ask about like pills and, all go through all of the substances and they'd be like, no, no, no. And by the end they're like, and then I was snorting this and then I was doing that. And they're being a little more open with me. And so like I would take what people would say during an assessment with a grain of salt, because a lot of times there's so much shame that in treatment, throughout the course of treatment, they'll open up more about, oh, I did actually use cocaine, as well as weed and alcohol. So it usually wasn't just one thing, but we would start off getting a really extensive history, and then we would go through mental health history as well. And then the severity of any of those symptoms. So anxiety, again, like, are you feeling like it's more mild, more moderate, more severe? Is it social situations or pretty general? So getting more specifics there. And then medications and psychiatric history. So if they've ever been hospitalized for a psychiatric reason. And then let me think what we would do. So there's always questions about any legal issues that they've had because of their substance use. So that would be on there. Any family or relationship issues that they've had, because the sign of having an addiction is when you are not functioning in other areas of your life because of the addiction. So if you are having relationship problems or legal problems because of the addiction, that's a sign, or because of your substance use, that's a sign that you have an addiction problem. Um, so that's kind of what we were looking for throughout the assessment, is covering like kind of all areas of their life, their career, like, have you called in sick to work because you were too hungover? And then that data would help us add up the number of symptoms. And I think if you had like 9 to 11 symptoms on this list, this checklist, that was the max. And then that would be the severe category. And that was helpful for tracking progress, because those clients would need to be an inpatient longer if you were in that severe category, and would need to be an outpatient longer as well, and then have like a therapist after, have family support. I mean, everyone needs that, but especially if you have the high number of symptoms on that list. So yeah, does that answer your question?
So I think you explained it very beautifully. So
Thanks.
I was thinking, what are the things that are actually healthy but give you like really high doses of dopamine, so it
Yeah.
can like help you, get to that low point? Yes.
Yeah. So talk therapy can help. But the things that give you really high dopamine are, I mean, I think therapy is probably helpful. Like talking about yourself, I think does give you dopamine, but definitely exercise, and definitely like sex or masturbation. And we would literally tell people like meetings, meditation, masturbation, like, don't go out and hook up with people right now, because like you're in early recovery, your emotions are going to be all over the place. So, focusing on yourself and going to meetings. And honestly, the 12-step meetings or any sort of recovery support meeting, being around other people who have been through the same experience gives you that dopamine rush of just having like solidarity with people. But yeah, and then food is another thing that a lot of people end up turning to, because it does give you dopamine, especially like sweets. So yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, I mean, exercise is supposed to be one of the very best for sure.
Are there any specific activities that you guys made up that would like provide a lot of dopamine?
No, and honestly, like the way you're talking about it, that's probably what we should have been doing more of. But because of liability reasons, like I took my clients on walks and stuff, but we never did. And you know what? I started a running club as well. So that was good. But then honestly, this is insane. One of our running club members, not during the club, but the day after, like the first or second meeting, he was getting really into it. He loved it. And he, before that was like kind of a couch potato. And he got hit by a Domino's delivery driver. So that was terrible. He was fine. He was totally fine. He broke his leg, I think, or his foot. Yeah. But it sucked because then the whole rest of the running club, when we worked up to a 5K, he couldn't participate. But that was really helping him mentally. And afterwards, he started running. When he was healed again, he started running again. But for dopamine, any type of cardio is like high intensity interval training and cardio, biking, like fast biking really helps. So anything like that, even 20 minutes. Yeah.
Do you think gaming helps?
Oh, that's interesting. So like,
Yeah.
what did you say?
To get that dopamine hit, does it
Yeah,
help?
it probably does. And I do see actually that same client was a gamer and still is. The problem with gaming, for me, at least as a therapist, an addiction therapist, is that I've seen people get addicted to it really quickly. And it's kind of similar, excuse me, to like gambling, where like things pop up on the screen and your dopamine lights up. And I worry because I've seen people with process addictions to gaming that addiction could transfer, like your substance addiction. Once you're sober from that, it could transfer to gaming. So we wouldn't encourage that very much because it's very antisocial. It's very isolating, and isolation is a trigger for relapse. But for people who did want to have that as like something they would do, it was fine as long as they were still sober. But I've definitely seen people like just play games all day in their room once they're sober. So yeah.
So how would you like provide someone with like really high doses of dopamine instead of like having them get addicted? Like and not have them get addicted.
Hmm. Well,
Like not make it an addiction.
that's a good question. And I think from what I understand, anything that's not a substance really can't get you addicted. And there's exceptions. And that, I mean, there is sex addiction, there is gambling addiction. I think that's in the DSM now, like gambling use disorder or something, gambling something disorder. And then there's gaming addiction and there's shopping addiction. I'm trying to think, there's like porn addiction. So those are process addictions, we would call them. And or even like spending, like, which I guess is the same as shopping. So really, those things can hit dopamine really high, as well as substances. But other than that, you can't like jack up your dopamine. I mean, I guess with food, with like binging and purging. So your question was what, how you could provide people with high doses of dopamine?
Yeah, and not have them get addicted.
Not have them get addicted. I think
So
that you
you
really
can like slowly lower the doses, I guess.
Yeah, that would be ideal. But I don't think that you can. And I think the reality is that the goal of addiction recovery is to be able to accept hitting just 50 or 60 and not hitting 5,000 every day. So yeah, I mean, if there was a way medically to do that with some sort of drug, that would be amazing to like taper people down. But I think so far, no one has figured that out. So as far as I know, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I mean, that's a great idea for research.
So yeah, that's all I have for today.
Cool. And is your school is called School of Future?
That's the program I'm in.
Oh, cool. Okay. And what is
It's an
it? What do you
entrepreneurial. It's an entrepreneurial program, so they help you with like whatever you want to work on.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And why did you pick addiction recovery stuff?
It's kind of personal for me because my grandpa, like he had a nicotine addiction and
Mm,
he had a stroke and that's how he died. And I was kind of like, I wasn't like, I wasn't old enough to like really know what was going on. And it's always been in my mind. Like I really wanted to know what was the deal with it. And it kind of like got me to like research more about it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that with me.
Thank you for giving me so good information. Like I didn't I didn't realize I was gonna learn more. I mean learn
Good.
that much. Actually it was thank you for your precious time.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you, Wasima. Is that how you say your name?
Wasima.
Wasima. Okay.
Emily,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you and I hope to see you later. We
Okay.
can talk again. Can we talk again?
Yeah. Yeah. Feel free to reach out to me
It,
anytime.
it was very refreshing to listen to.
Good.
All right. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. Thank you. And let me know how the project goes. And yeah, I'm always here if you want to talk again.
All right. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks.
Also, are you voting?
Yeah, I already voted.
Oh, all right.
What about you?
I'm not 18 yet.
Darn it, we need your vote. Thanks,
All right.
Wasima. Bye. Wasima.